So the next thing we're going to try is to create an interactive sketch using mouse input and start to weave in variables to allow us to control some of the form making.
We're going to add on to what we did in the last sketch. Earlier we talked about using a code block, in this case void setup, to put items in the sketch that we want to run only once. Some things that would go in here are size. We could also set the background color in here. Maybe I want a gray color, so I'll just use one value here. Now, what we're going to do is take mouse input, and in order to do that, we need to kind of get the mouse values over time. So we're going to write another code block that's called void draw, and this is going to run continuously throughout the life of the sketch. Void setup only runs once, and maybe I'll leave a comment. And void draw is going to run continuously. Let's start with a rectangle. We're going to call the function rect, and here, instead of putting in fixed values, we're going to say mouseX and mouseY. And it's important that you use a capital X and a capital Y here. You can see that the type changed colors because I did it correctly. If you only put a lowercase mouseY, you're going to see it's not changing colors. It's calling it out. It's underlined. So keep that in mind. And let's just say 50 and 50. Right now, this is going to use the default rect mode, which is in the upper left-hand corner. It's going to use the default fill, which I believe is white. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so you can see it is running here, and it's drawing a white rectangle in the left-hand corner over time. And because background is up in setup, it only runs once. And so that's why all those rectangles are visible. But if you wanted to kind of erase that, erase each rectangle, you could write background into draw here, and that's going to run every frame. The code will run from the top to the bottom, so basically it'll redraw the background, it'll draw the rectangle, and it'll come back around to the top, where it'll redraw the rectangle, or redraw the background, and then draw the current rectangle. So this is what that looks like. And now you can see all those things are being drawn, but they're being continuously drawn over. So it looks like there's just one rectangle here, one square. If you wanted to change the rect mode, one good place to do it maybe is up here at the top, because you're going to set it once for the whole sketch, and you don't need to keep running that code. That might be a little bit too extra. So here we're going to change the rect mode, and you'll see now it's in the center. Okay, so we're going to use these ideas to create our own drawing tools that are a little bit more complicated, and we're going to do that by starting to use randomness and variables. All right, let's talk about variables quickly. So the power of variables is that they allow us to reference data even when it changes. We can think about a variable as sort of a container or location, and we're kind of linking to that location or linking to that container. And so, as that the value of whatever's inside of that at that location or in that container changes, we can also get updates from that, and that's really powerful. I'll show you some examples when we get started. Some things to keep in mind: variables must be declared. The type needs to be declared, and they need to be initialized, so they need to be given an initial value. Variable names must be one word with no spaces, and start with a letter, no numbers or special characters except underscore. So sometimes if you don't follow those rules, you'll see some errors. When it comes to variable types, here are some common ones that we'll encounter. A Boolean is a variable that accepts one of two values, either a true or false. It's a good way to kind of create a condition between two, almost like a switch, and assess the trueness of something. char is a character, like a letter A, B, C, or a punctuation mark, or number, or the special character. A string is a sequence of characters, so a word, or a series of numbers. That could be a string. Int it stands for integer, which is a whole number. This is a number that doesn't have a decimal associated with it, and a float is a decimal number. It's like a floating point number. So an example of an integer would be the number 1. A float would be like 1.3, 1.4, or even 1.0 would be an example of a float. And it's important that when you use variables that that the type remains constant. You can do something called casting, or change the type of variable you have, but in general, it's really important to keep track of what type of variable you're using. Let's do something quick with variables in processing. So earlier I talked about declaring and initializing your variables. Let's declare a variable. It's going to be type of int or integer. Let's say it's going to be x. So we can name it, whatever we want, as long as it starts with a letter, not a number, right? As we said earlier. And here we're going to initialize it. So we're going to say it equals 10. This works because 10 is a integer, but if I did 10.3 and then I tried to run the program, it would say something like, oh, can't convert from float. This is 10.3 is a float. So the type of variable really is important. So let me just say 10. If I wanted a number like 10.3, maybe I'll make another variable. I'll call it x2. So you can have numbers in your variable names. They just can't be the first ones there. It's equal to 10.3. And the beauty of a variable is, we talked about it being a way to reference a value. Instead of using this number 10.3, I could just reference what is x2 and see what that does. So I'm going to use a command here to print something into the console, which is down here. So I'm going to say print x2, print ln x2, and when I run the program, this value of x2 should pop into here. And you can see, 10.3 popped in there. So we're going to do some more things with that as we go. Just to wrap up the variables, earlier we said you could have a Boolean. So this is a Boolean. You name it whatever you want, but it needs to be true or false. So we can say that. I think we talked about char. So I just want to show you declaring and initializing some variables. So we can do that. Let me just try this. Whoops. I think you need to use single quotes on this for a character. Yep. And if you want to use a string, I should say string. And let's go down here and print that out. So for a string, you can use double quotes. For a character, you have to use single quotes. The random function in processing is really interesting. It will return random values according to a range that you set. So one thing you should know about it is that it will return float values, decimals, instead of integers, unless you run another function on it. So let me, inside of draw, I'm going to declare and initialize this variable. I'll call it r is equal to random, and here I'm going to call the random function. If I give it only one value, it's going to give me, like for example, if I said 10, it's going to give me a random value from 0 to 10. But if I did another random value here, I could say give me a random value starting at 10 and going up to 20, so I can do minimum and maximum values. Rando 10. Oh, I don't need to put semicolons there, but I just did it out of habit. And if I want to print these, what does R look like? And I'll just do this underneath it so you can see. R2. We should see numbers in here. One should be from 0 to 10, and the other one should be in between 10 and 20. Let's just verify that that's happening. This is going to run pretty quickly. You can see it's running at the frame rate of the sketch. And processing, I think the default is 60 frames per second, but we can change that as we go along. So as I said, it's going to start between 0 and 10 and then go up to 10 and 20. So you're seeing kind of this pattern here. Okay, so the assignment now is to try to use variables and randomness to create drawing tools. We're going to start with the setup. What we want to do is create a drawing tool that will update frame by frame. So we're going to need to use a code block called draw. In the past, we've said that void setup will only run once at the top of the sketch, and void draw is going to run continuously through the life of the sketch. Inside of setup, we'll set the size. 960 by 540. We could put a background in here. Okay. I want to start putting variables in to drive this. One variable I'm going to use, again, I need to declare and initialize my variables. So I'm going to make a variable called sizer. It's going to help me size everything. So I'm going to declare and initialize. The reason I'm putting it up here at the top, even on top of void setup, is that I want it to be accessible globally throughout the sketch. So that means I could use this variable can be accessed in setup or draw, or if I write another function later on, that variable can be used. So that's why it's outside of here. You'll see that sometimes variables only if I wrote it only in draw, it would only be accessible within draw. That's called local scope, but we need these to be accessible globally. And maybe we'll just start off with a rectangle. What we can do in this case is actually take, if you remember, rectangle has X and Y position and the size. Maybe we'll use randomness here, and we'll say we want this rectangle to be placed randomly on within the sketch. So it'll go anywhere from 0 to the width of the sketch. In this case, width is a system variable, and it tracks out to 960. If we go to height, that'll be 540. The reason it's maybe good to do it this way is if I later on change the size of my sketch, it will update automatically. And maybe for the size, I'll say sizer and sizer. So you should see that this is going to be 10. And just for us to check it, let's write this print ln sizer, and that should print inside the console. Let's run it. Hit Command R to run it, and you're seeing, yeah, now it's this square, this rectangle is being randomly drawn on the surface, and we're using that variable sizer to size this. Earlier, I said one of the nice things about a variable is that you can change the value of that variable, and because it's more of a reference, a link, or a location, that the changing value can be updated in your sketch. So if I wanted to update sizer and say sizer is equal to sizer plus 2, what's going to happen is every time it runs down here, it's going to add 2 to sizer, and then it's going to come back up to the top, and with that new updated value, it's going to run, and then at the bottom, it's going to add 2 again. So we should see this getting larger and larger as we go. And yeah, you can see that is going really quickly. I believe the frame rate for processing is default around 60. So, I'm going to run it a little bit slower, maybe at 30. Let's see what that looks like. And I'm gonna just play around with some things while I'm here. Maybe I'll change the fill. We could put in random numbers here: random 255, random 55. This is gonna give us a random color. And with fill, if you put in 3 values, it's RGB, and if you put in a 4th, it's actually the transparency. So maybe let's see what this looks like with a little bit of opacity. I'll say 100. That's going to be a little bit of transparency. So you can see that now they're slightly transparent. They'll kind of fade over each other. So this is a way for us to create a random sketch, and we're using variables here. One thing that might happen though is once we get the sizer gets so large, maybe you want it to get smaller again, or maybe this is it's just going to look too choppy or something. So let's look at a way for us to maybe set some conditions for the sizer that would maybe reset it. What we're going to do is use like an expression, a conditional expression. What we can do is set a condition, and if that condition is true, we'll execute the code within the code block. The way that works is, we're going to use an if statement, and maybe we'll say if sizer is greater than a certain size, maybe we'll say 400 for now. Then we'll set the sizer back to 10. And you see how I close that off with these brackets. If this condition is true, whatever's in the code block will happen. So at a certain point, you can see it got up to 1500 down here in the console. Now it'll never get above, it'll never get too much larger than 400 because it'll reset to 10. So let's run that and let's see what that does. So it's running. It got big, and then it got small again. If you see those values there, I'm looking at the console too, and I can watch the value of sizer change. So that is, a quick way for us to look at this. I'm going to make a new sketch that's using mouse input to drive where these objects or items are going to be drawn. Let's start by creating a setup. I'm going to change the frame rate to 30. And I'll create a slightly bluish background. I want to have some variables, global variables up at the top that I can use. Let's use sizer again, equal to 50. So again, what we're doing here is declaring and initialize variables inside of draw, and draw is again going to keep running every frame. We're going to start with let's start with an ellipse. Oops. We can use mouseX and mouseY, and let's do sizer and sizer. What does that look like? There's my mouse, and it's driving these circles. We're going to do what we did earlier, which is adjust sizer. What I want to do is say sizer is equal to sizer plus change. Another way of writing this, and how it's just a little bit quicker, is to write plus equals change. So I'm just going to delete that for now, but this is what this line of code means. Again, the issue with this is at a certain point, the sizer is going to get too large, and it's not really going to look like anything. It's just going to be kind of a white area. So we want to make a condition where we're resetting or adjusting sizer. Actually, what I want to do is, make the sizer get larger, and then at a certain point, make it kind of change direction and get smaller, and keep doing that. So it'll get larger, smaller, larger, smaller. What we can do is write our condition. Maybe we'll say sizer when it's at 100. What happens when it gets greater than 100? We'll say that we want change to become negative. Instead of adding the value of change, which is 10, we want to subtract it. So one way to do that is to say change is equal to change times, and asterisk is the multiplication operator, -1. Just so we could also write it like this: change times equals -1. That's the same as what we did up here. And this works when it's getting too large, and maybe we want to set a condition when it gets too small, when it's less than 20. For example, equals change times -1. So that's going to change it from a negative value into a positive value. We want to make sure these code blocks are contained. So this only applies to what's happening in here. And let's start. I had the wrong variable name. Let's call it sizer. And you can see it's getting bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller. There you go. That's probably a good illustration of that. So from here, what I want to do is make this a drawing tool that has a few different options. When I press different keys, it's going to draw different things. One thing I could do is even just use a Boolean expression here. Again, a Boolean expression is a true or false. And I could say if any key is pressed. Let's do it maybe just for this one. If any key is pressed, then we'll draw the circle. So let's see what that looks like. Right now, I haven't pressed any keys, but then I'm just pressing a key on my keypad. And this is nice because it lets me kind of press things, and it doesn't have to always be drawing. The next step of this is maybe I'll draw different shapes on different key presses. And I'll also maybe have different colors for each one. So maybe what I want to do is set a key for this. We're going to use if key. Now this is really important. Earlier I said with variables that you should use single quotes for keys, and that's for characters, and that's true for keys. So a single quote, let's say R. This is the condition. If the key that we've pressed, this is inside of the key press, so it's sort of if there's kind of two conditions that are being met. If that key press is happening there, R, then we'll draw this ellipse. Let me hit Command T to clean up my code so I can see which block is within which block. And within R, maybe I'll also set a random fill. I want it to be mostly red, so maybe it's 200, 255, and then 0 and 0. So again, this is RGB values. This should only draw when I hit the R key. And yeah, that's true. You can see there is a slight variation in the colors, some a little bit darker, a little bit lighter. If I want more, I can increase the range. Yeah, maybe I want to increase that a little bit more. Let's say 150. So there's more variation. Yeah, now you can see there's a little bit more variation in there. Those are randomly picked values. Okay, so let's take this idea and let's write other possible things for us to do. I'm going to do key G. I'm basically going to make like a red, green, blue shape drawer. And I'll say if the key is G, maybe we'll do a rect. Mouse X, mouse Y. Now, if I want this to be in the center of where the mouse is, remember that the default mode for rect is the upper left-hand corner. So maybe I'll say minus sizer divided by 2 and minus sizer divided by 2 so that it just shifts it over so it's in the middle of my mouse. So that should draw a rectangle when I hit the key G. Remember, single quote here. Fill, we want it to be mostly green, so we could, inside of here, we could say random 255 and 0. Hit Command T to just clean it up. I want to just keep going and finish this off. So the last one I'm going to do is I guess it'll be a triangle, and we want it to be key is equal to B. Now, I was thinking I would do a triangle here. There is actually a triangle function that we could write, but I wanted to show maybe a way to kind of create your own shapes or even play around with the way it's structured. There's some code. It's a begin shape and end shape, and we'll also want to write in here close. This allows us to put points on the canvas and create a shape out of those points. The way that we draw those points is by using the vertex function. So let's do mouseX. Hopefully this is intuitive to you. We have that mouseX value and we're shifting to the left a little bit where that is, and we have mouseY and we're shifting downwards. It's in the positive value. That's for the bottom left-hand corner of that triangle. On the bottom right-hand corner, it would be mouseX plus sizer divided by 2, mouseY plus sizer divided by 2, and then the middle, the top value is going to be vertex. It's going to be in the middle, so just mouseX, mouseY, and since we want to go upwards, we're actually subtracting sizer divided by 2. And if you had another, you could totally add another vertex in here, and maybe we'll do it for fun after we figure this out. But let's do that, and let's also make a fill 0, 0, random 255. So this is going to give us kind of a random values in the blue area. I missed something. Missing a semicolon somewhere. Okay, so we're missing a semicolon right there. Oh, and what happened here? mouseY. Whoops. I love getting those errors, or I love seeing the errors. I don't love getting them. Okay, here's that triangle, hitting B. Here's R, or here's G to draw this, and here's R. So this is my custom drawing tool that I've made, and you can make further additions here. Again, the reason I showed this, there is already a triangle function, but what I could do now is like, this is going to give me some random shape. Maybe I'll do mouseX plus random like 100. What does that look like? mouseY plus. So this is going to let me create this four-sided shape with 4 vertexes, but that last point is going to be random, and it's going to be strange to see what that looks like. Here it is. Right? Yeah, so that's the reason I showed this bit of code, begin shape and end shape. Make sure you write close to fully close that shape, and I'm going to delete this for now, but yeah, hopefully this gives you some ideas and techniques for building your own drawing tools, and I'm really curious to see what you make out of this. I realized there was something else I wanted to cover before I ended this video. One is, is there a way that we could wipe the screen and start new if it just got too messy? One thing we could do is make our own another key press. Maybe it's the space bar. We'll use that as a way to reset things. And what we could just do is create a new background in here. And so we'll say whenever we hit the space bar, create a background, which will effectively cover up everything else. So we have that right there. And the other thing I wanted to show is, what if we wanted to save what we have, to kind of save it as an image? We could make another key press in here. Maybe I'll use S for save. And there is some code, there's a function called saveFrame, and this will save the current frame that you're on. I'm going to copy and paste a reference to the saveFrame literature on the processing.org website. Basically what we'll do is write the function saveFrame. You could name it whatever you want. One thing that's helpful is maybe, saving with the frame number so that, you're not saving over it each time. The number of marks here is going to determine how it gets written. So in this case, it'll probably save as frame like 000, whatever the frame number is. And we can set the style or the type of image. I'm going to save it as a JPEG, but you could save it as a TIFF, a PNG, some other file formats based on that. So you want to make sure that you've saved the sketch folder, and when you hit the key, it should save that frame into the sketch folder.